Marry me. The words hung in the air of the 37th floor boardroom like a thunderclap, causing every head at the mahogany conference table to turn in stunned silence. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of Blackthorn Industries, Manhattan's skyline glittered in the December twilight, but inside time had stopped. Celeste Delacroix nearly dropped the stack of translation documents she'd been hired to deliver. Her emerald eyes widened as she stared at Dorian Blackthorn, the ruthless tech mogul who had just interrupted his own board meeting to make the most shocking proposition of her life. "Excuse me?" she whispered, her soft Louisiana accent barely audible in the cavernous room. Dorian stood at the head of the table, his 6'3" frame commanding attention in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His steel blue eyes fixed on her with laser intensity, as if the 12 board members around them had simply vanished into thin air. "You heard me correctly, Miss Delacroix." His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "I'm proposing marriage. A business arrangement, naturally." The elderly chairman of the board, Harold Whitmore, cleared his throat nervously. "Dorian, perhaps we should adjourn." "No." Dorian's gaze never left Celeste's face. "This concerns all of you. As you're well aware, my grandmother's will stipulates that I must be married by my 35th birthday to maintain controlling interest in Blackthorn Industries. That gives me exactly 6 months." Celeste felt her cheeks burn, with embarrassment and confusion. She was a freelance translator who specialized in French literature, called in today to handle some international contracts. How had she suddenly become the centerpiece of a corporate drama? "Mr. Blackthorn," she said, finding her voice, "I think there's been some misunderstanding. I'm here to deliver translations, not whatever this is." A smile played at the corner of his mouth, the first hint of warmth she'd seen from the man the financial press had dubbed the Ice King of Wall Street. "There's no misunderstanding. I've been observing you for the past 3 weeks, Miss Delacroix. Every Tuesday when you deliver our French correspondence, every interaction with my staff, every moment you thought no one was watching." He stepped closer, his presence both intimidating and magnetic. "You're exactly what I need." "This is insane," Celeste breathed, backing toward the door. Her heart was racing, whether from fear or something else entirely, she couldn't tell. "Is it?" Dorian moved around the table with predatory grace. "You're struggling to pay for your mother's medical treatments in New Orleans. Your translation business barely covers your Manhattan studio apartment rent. You're drowning in debt, and we both know it." The accuracy of his words hit her like a physical blow. How could he possibly know about her mother's cancer treatments? About the second job she worked nights at a downtown cafe? About the eviction notice she'd received last week? "I'm offering you $10 million, he continued, his voice dropping to an intimate tone despite their very public audience. "For 1 year of marriage. No physical expectations, no romantic entanglements, pure business. You help me secure my inheritance, and I solve every financial problem you've ever had." The board members sat in stunned silence, their eyes darting. Between their CEO and the young woman who had inadvertently walked into what felt like a scene from a fever dream, Celeste's mind reeled. $10 million. Her mother's treatments fully covered. No more sleepless nights wondering how to pay bills. No more pride-swallowed working jobs beneath her master's degree in comparative literature. "Why me?" she whispered. Dorian was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and intoxicating that made her thoughts scatter like leaves in the wind. "Because you're genuine in a world full of artificial people. Because when Mrs. Henderson in accounting had her heart attack last month, you stayed late to make sure she was comfortable until the paramedics arrived. Because you've never once looked at me the way other women do, like I'm a prize to be won." His eyes searched her face. "You see me as human, not as a bank account. That's rarer than you might think." The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and impossibility in equal measure. "I need time to think," Celeste managed. "You have until tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. My private office, 1 floor up." He handed her an elegant black business card embossed with gold lettering. "Don't disappoint me, Miss Delacroix." As she clutched the card with trembling fingers, Celeste realized her entire world had just tilted off its axis. Behind her, she could hear the board members beginning to murmur among themselves, but all she could focus on was the man in front of her, the brilliant, impossible, arrogant billionaire who had just offered her a fortune to play his wife. What she didn't know was that Dorian Blackthorne, for all his calculated coldness, had been utterly unprepared for the way his heart had started racing the moment she'd walked into his boardroom 6 months ago. Or that this business arrangement was about to become the most dangerous game either of them had ever played. Outside, snow began to fall on Manhattan, and somewhere in the winter sky, fate was laughing at them both. Celeste hadn't slept a single minute. She stood in front of the gleaming Blackthorne Industries tower at 8:47 a.m., clutching a steaming cup of coffee like a lifeline and staring up at the building that housed either her salvation or her complete downfall. The December morning was crisp, and her breath formed small clouds in the air as she wrestled with the most insane decision of her 28 years. $10 million. The number had haunted her all night, dancing through her dreams, alongside images of her mother's tired face during the last chemotherapy session. "You look like someone who's about to jump off a cliff," came a familiar voice behind her. Celeste turned to find Marcus Chen, Dorian's head of security, approaching with an amused smile. She'd seen him during her weekly translation deliveries, always professional, always watching, but never intrusive. "Maybe I am," she admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "For what it's worth," Marcus said, pressing the elevator button for her. "I've worked for him for 8 years. He's demanding, brilliant, and absolutely ruthless in business, but he's never once broken his word to anyone." He paused, studying her face. "And I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you yesterday." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and Celeste stepped inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. What way was that? Like he'd found something he didn't even know he was looking for. The 38th floor was Dorian's private domain, a sprawling office suite that screamed power and sophistication. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of Central Park, now dusted with fresh snow. Abstract art worth more than most people's homes adorned the walls, and everything from the Italian leather furniture to the crystal decanters spoke of wealth beyond imagination. Dorian stood with his back to her, silhouetted against the morning light. He wore a navy suit that fit him like it had been painted on, and when he turned, those piercing blue eyes immediately found hers. "You came," he said simply. "I did." Celeste lifted her chin, drawing on every ounce of courage she possessed. "But I have questions." "I'd be disappointed if you didn't." He gestured to the seating area, 2 cream-colored leather chairs positioned around a glass coffee table. "Coffee? Breakfast? I've had enough caffeine to fuel a small aircraft, thank you." That earned her another of those rare, almost smiles. "Nervous?" Terrified would be more accurate. She settled into the chair, acutely aware of how her simple black dress and modest heels looked in this temple of luxury. "Let's start with the obvious question. Why not hire an actress? Surely someone in Hollywood would jump at this opportunity." Dorian took the chair across from her, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes. "Because actresses are trained to pretend. I need someone real. My grandmother was extraordinarily perceptive. She'll see through any performance in minutes." "Your grandmother is still alive?" "Very much so. Eleanor Blackthorne, 92 years old and sharper than most people half her age. She lives in our family estate in the Hamptons and has very specific opinions about the kind of woman I should marry." His expression darkened slightly. "She was the one who created this ridiculous clause in the will. What kind of woman does she want you to marry? Someone kind, someone genuine, someone who isn't impressed by money." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "Someone exactly like you, Miss Delacroix." Celeste felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You don't know me well enough to make that assessment." "Don't I?" Dorian pulled out a tablet and swiped it to life. Celeste Marie Delacroix. Born in New Orleans. Master's degree in comparative literature from Tulane University. Moved to New York 3 years ago to care for your mother, who was diagnosed with stage 3 breast cancer. You've been working multiple jobs to afford her treatments at Memorial Sloan Kettering. He looked up from the screen. Last Tuesday, you gave your lunch to that homeless veteran who sits outside our building. You didn't think anyone noticed. The invasion of privacy should have made her angry, but instead she felt oddly exposed, as if he'd looked directly into her soul. That's information, not knowledge, she said quietly. You don't know that I talk to my plants, or that I cry during romantic comedies, or that I once got so lost in Paris that I ended up having dinner with a family of strangers who took pity on me. Something shifted in his expression, surprise perhaps, or interest. Tell me about the family in Paris. The Dubois family. I was 23, completely turned around in Montmartre, and started crying on their front steps. Madame Dubois brought me inside, fed me the most incredible coq au vin, and let me sleep on their couch. We still exchange Christmas cards. She smiled at the memory. They taught me that kindness exists everywhere, if you're open to seeing it. Dorian was quiet for a long moment, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. My contract, he said finally, reaching into his desk drawer, is quite comprehensive. He handed her a leather portfolio thick enough to be a novel. The terms are simple. We marry within the month. A small ceremony, family only. You'll live in my penthouse here in Manhattan, attend necessary social functions as my wife, and meet with my grandmother regularly to maintain the illusion. In return, you receive $10 million paid in full after our year is complete. Celeste's hands trembled as she opened the portfolio. The legal language was dense, but certain phrases jumped out at her. Separate bedrooms. No physical intimacy required. Dissolution after 1 year. Confidentiality agreement. And after the year? She asked. Clean divorce? Mutual decision? You're free to disappear with your money, and I maintain control of Blackthorn Industries. He paused. Unless, of course, circumstances change. What kind of circumstances? For the first time since she'd met him, Dorian Blackthorn looked almost vulnerable. I don't know yet. The honesty in his voice made her breath catch. Outside, snow was beginning to fall more heavily, and the city below looked like something from a fairy tale. I need one more thing, Celeste said, surprising herself with her boldness. Name it. My mother gets the best care possible, not just treatment, comfort, dignity, everything she needs. And I want to be able to visit her whenever necessary. No questions asked. Done. He didn't hesitate for even a second. Anything else? She looked at the contract, then at the man across from her. Brilliant, powerful, and somehow lonely despite everything he possessed. Just one thing. If we're going to do this, we do it right. No half measures, no obvious pretending. If your grandmother is as perceptive as you say, she'll need to believe we're actually in love. Dorian's eyes darkened. That could be dangerous territory, Miss Delacroix. Maybe, she said, reaching for the pen he offered her. But I've never been one to play it safe. As she signed her name at the bottom of the contract, Celeste wondered if she was making the smartest decision of her life or the most foolish. Either way, there was no turning back now. Welcome to the Blackthorn family, Dorian said softly, and something in his voice made her think that maybe, just maybe, this arrangement was going to be far more complicated than either of them had bargained for. 3 weeks later, Celeste stood in the marble foyer of Dorian's penthouse, surrounded by enough designer luggage to outfit a small fashion magazine, and wondered how her life had become a scene from a movie she never would have auditioned for. The penthouse occupied the entire top floor of a Fifth Avenue building and was nothing short of spectacular. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park. The living spaces flowed together with architectural precision, and every surface seemed to gleam with understated luxury. It was beautiful, intimidating, and felt absolutely nothing like home. Your room is down this hall, Dorian said, appearing behind her with the quiet grace that seemed to be his trademark. He'd changed from his business attire into dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that made his eyes look impossibly blue. The casual look was somehow more unsettling than his usual armor of expensive suits. It made him seem approachable, almost human. My room? She followed him down a wide hallway lined with original photographs of New York through the decades. Master suite is mine, obviously, but I had the guest suite redecorated for you. He stopped at double doors and pushed them open, with what might have been nervousness. I hope it's acceptable. Acceptable was an understatement. The space was larger than her entire former apartment, decorated in soft creams and sage greens that somehow felt both luxurious and comfortable. French doors opened onto a private terrace. A sitting area was perfectly arranged around a fireplace, and the bed looked like something from a fairy tale. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers along the silk curtains. "But Dorian, if we're supposed to be convincing your grandmother we're in love, won't she expect us to share a bedroom?" He went very still. "Grandmother is traditional, but she's not going to inspect our sleeping arrangements." "Are you sure about that?" Celeste turned to face him, noting the way his jaw had tightened. "Because if she's as perceptive as you claim, she might notice that your wife doesn't know how you take your coffee or which side of the bed you sleep on." "I sleep on the right side," he said automatically, then looked annoyed with himself for answering. "See? And I don't know that because we're essentially strangers playing dress-up." She moved closer, emboldened by his obvious discomfort. "If we're going to sell this, we need to know each other. Really know each other." "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we spend time together, not just the formal dinners and charity galas in your calendar. Real time, conversations, shared experiences." She smiled, enjoying the way he looked, slightly panicked by the prospect. "Don't worry, Mr. Blackthorne, I'm not proposing anything scandalous, just friendship." Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression shifted to something resembling panic. "Grandmother," he muttered, then answered with a completely different voice. Warmer, more relaxed. "Hello, Eleanor." Celeste couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but she watched Dorian's face cycle through several emotions before settling on resignation. "Of course we'd love to have dinner tomorrow night. Yes, I'll bring Celeste. No, you don't need to cook anything special." He paused, listening. "Because she's wonderful, grandmother. You'll see." When he hung up, he looked at Celeste with an expression that was half apology, half terror. "Tomorrow night, dinner at the family estate in the Hamptons. She wants to meet her new granddaughter-in-law." "Already?" Celeste felt her own surge of panic. "We haven't even practiced being us yet." Which brings me to an important point. Dorian moved to his desk and returned with a small velvet box that made her heart skip several beats. "We're going to need these." He opened the box to reveal 2 wedding rings. Hers, a stunning vintage Art Deco design with a central diamond surrounded by sapphires. His, a simple platinum band that somehow looked perfect on his long fingers as he slipped it on. "They're beautiful," she whispered, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, and she wondered how he'd known her size. "But when did we supposedly get married? And where?" "Your grandmother is going to ask questions." "Last weekend, small ceremony at the plaza, just immediate family." He'd clearly thought this through. "We can say we wanted privacy given the media attention my personal life usually attracts." Celeste stared at the ring on her finger. Easily worth more than she'd make in 5 years of translation work. It was beautiful, elegant, and felt like wearing someone else's life. "Dorian," she said softly, "what happens if she doesn't believe us?" For a moment, his carefully constructed mask slipped and she saw something vulnerable underneath. "Then I lose everything my family built over 4 generations. And you?" He paused. "And you go back to your life, $10 million richer. Is that what you think? That I'm only here for the money? Aren't you?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Celeste studied his face. The sharp cheekbones, the guarded eyes, the mouth that rarely smiled. He was brilliant and powerful and probably the loneliest person she'd ever met. "Initially, yes," she admitted. But that was before I realized you were going to be more complicated than I expected. Complicated how? She moved closer, noting how he didn't step back. You have 17 different coffee machines in your kitchen, but drink tea in the evenings. You own more books than some libraries, but they're all well read, not just for show. You know the name of every employee in this building, including the night janitor's daughter who's starting college next fall. She smiled at his surprised expression. You're not the heartless billionaire the newspapers make you out to be, are you? Don't romanticize me, Celeste. I'm exactly as ruthless as they say. Maybe in business, but you paid for Mrs. Henderson's grandson's surgery without telling anyone. Marcus mentioned it. Dorian's eyes flashed with something between anger and panic. Marcus talks too much. He cares about you. They all do. She reached out and straightened his sweater, a gesture so casually intimate that they both froze. The question is, do you care about them? I care about keeping this company successful and my employees paid. That's not what I asked. For a long moment, they stood close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. Close enough that she could smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his skin. Close enough that when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. You're going to make this very difficult, aren't you? Make what difficult? Keeping this purely business. The admission hung in the air between them like a confession, and Celeste felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous flutter of possibility that had nothing to do with contracts or money. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, she said softly. Outside, the sun was setting over Central Park, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And somewhere in the growing darkness, both of them began to realize that their carefully constructed arrangement was about to become something neither of them had bargained for. Tomorrow they would face Eleanor Blackthorne. Tonight they were just two people standing in a penthouse above the city, wearing wedding rings that felt more real with every passing second. The Blackthorne estate in the Hamptons looked like something from a Jane Austen novel, all weathered stone and ivy-covered walls rising majestically from perfectly manicured grounds. As their car crunched up the gravel drive, Celeste pressed her palms against her navy silk dress and tried to calm her racing heart. Breathe, Dorian said softly, his hand finding hers. She's going to love you. And if she doesn't, then we're both in trouble. He squeezed her fingers and she was surprised by how natural the gesture felt. They'd spent the morning rehearsing their love story over breakfast, but somewhere between discussing their fictional first date and debating coffee preferences, the lines had begun to blur. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a woman who was clearly the force of nature Dorian had described. Eleanor Blackthorne stood barely 5 feet tall, but her presence filled the entire doorway. Silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, sharp blue eyes that missed nothing, and a smile that was equal parts warmth and calculation. Dorian, darling, she said, accepting his kiss on her cheek. And you must be Celeste. Mrs. Blackthorne. Celeste extended her hand but found herself pulled into a surprisingly strong embrace instead. None of that formal nonsense. You're family now. Eleanor stepped back, studying Celeste with the intensity of a jeweler examining a rare diamond. My goodness, you're even more beautiful than Dorian described. And that dress, Chanel? Actually, it's vintage. I found it at a consignment shop in Soho. Celeste immediately regretted the admission, certain it was the wrong thing to say to someone who probably had Chanel's personal number. But Eleanor's face lit up with genuine delight. A woman after my own heart. I haven't bought a new dress in 20 years. I simply have my favorites altered when fashion changes. She linked arms with Celeste, leading them into a foyer that managed to be both grand and welcoming. Tell me, dear, how did my stubborn grandson finally convince you to marry him? Celeste caught Dorian's eye, seeing his almost imperceptible nod. This was it, their first real test. He didn't convince me of anything, she said with a smile. I think I convinced him. Oh? Eleanor's eyebrows rose with interest. Do tell. They moved into a sitting room filled with antiques and family photographs, of fire crackling warmly in the hearth. Eleanor poured tea from a delicate porcelain service while Celeste searched for the right words. He was so serious all the time, she began, the story flowing more naturally than she'd expected. All business, all the time. I told him he needed to learn how to have fun. And how did you teach him that? Celeste glanced at Dorian, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. I made him take a cooking class with me. This was completely fictional. They'd never taken a cooking class together. But something about the way Dorian's eyes softened made the lie feel almost true. Cooking? Eleanor looked delighted. Dorian, you haven't cooked a meal since you were 12 years old. Celeste has a way of making the impossible seem reasonable, he said, his voice carrying a warmth that sent shivers down her spine. She taught me that life is about more than quarterly reports and board meetings. And what did he teach you? Dear? Eleanor asked, turning back to Celeste. The question caught her off guard. What had Dorian taught her? That kindness could hide behind a wall of corporate formality? That loneliness could exist in the middle of a crowd? That sometimes the person who seemed to have everything was actually missing the most important things? He taught me that love doesn't always announce itself with fanfare, she said quietly, the words surprising her with their honesty. Sometimes it creeps up on you quietly, in small moments, like when he remembers how you take your tea, or when he calls to make sure you got home safely from work, or when he looks at you like you're the most important person in his world. The room fell silent except for the crackling of the fire. Eleanor's sharp eyes moved between them, and Celeste held her breath, certain they'd been found out. How long have you known you were in love with her, Dorian? Eleanor asked suddenly. Dorian didn't hesitate. Since the moment she told me I was being ridiculous for working 16-hour days and that my employees probably went home and complained about me to their families. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. She was right, of course, she usually is. And you, Celeste, when did you know? When he stayed with me at the hospital during my mother's surgery, she said, the words coming from somewhere deep and honest. He didn't have to be there. He had meetings, important calls. But he stayed anyway, brought me terrible coffee from the vending machine, and never once complained about the uncomfortable chairs. She looked at Dorian, surprised to find tears threatening. That's when I knew he wasn't just successful or powerful. He was good. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Then she smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and made her look decades younger. Well, she said, setting down her teacup with a decisive clink. It's about time, ma'am, Celeste asked. I've been waiting 34 years for this boy to find someone who could see past his armor, someone who could make him laugh, make him human again. She reached over and patted Celeste's hand. Welcome to the family, my dear. Truly. Dinner was a revelation. Eleanor regaled them with stories of Dorian's childhood, how he'd tried to reorganize her garden at age 8, how he'd started his first business selling handmade cards at 10, how he'd cried for 3 days when his childhood dog died, but refused to let anyone comfort him. He's always been proud, Eleanor said, passing around dessert, a homemade apple tart that could have graced any 5-star restaurant. Too proud sometimes. His parents were the same way. When they died in that car accident when he was 15, he just shut down, buried himself in work and achievement. Celeste felt her heart clench as she watched Dorian's face carefully arrange itself into neutral lines. Suddenly, so much about him made sense. The walls, the control, the fear of letting anyone too close. That's enough ancient history, grandmother, he said quietly. Nonsense. Celeste should know these things. Eleanor's voice softened. You should know that underneath all that corporate armor is the sweetest boy who used to bring me flowers from the garden every Sunday after church. I still bring you flowers, Dorian protested. Expensive arrangements from the florist don't count, darling. Eleanor laughed. But I suspect that will change now. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor pulled Celeste aside while Dorian brought the car around. Take care of him, she said simply. He's been alone too long. Mrs. Blackthorne, Eleanor, please. The older woman's eyes were kind but knowing. And don't look so worried, dear. Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, doesn't it? The drive back to Manhattan was unusually quiet. Finally, as they crossed the bridge back into the city, Dorian spoke. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For tonight. For making her happy. For—" He paused, searching for words. "For seeing something in me worth defending." Celeste studied his profile in the passing streetlights. The strong jaw, the careful composure that couldn't quite hide the vulnerability underneath. "The things I said in there," she began carefully, "about when I knew I loved you. You don't have to explain, it was part of the performance." "Was it?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Dorian was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, as they pulled up to their building, he turned to look at her. "I did stay with you at a hospital once," he said quietly. "In my imagination, every Tuesday when you came to deliver translations and looked tired or worried, I wondered what was wrong, if there was anything I could do to help." He paused. The terrible coffee from the vending machine, the uncomfortable chairs. "I imagined all of it." Celeste's breath caught. "Dorian." "We passed Eleanor's test," he said, stepping out of the car. "That's what matters." But as they rode the elevator up to their penthouse, both of them knew that something had shifted tonight. The line between performance and reality had blurred beyond recognition, and neither of them was quite sure what that meant for their carefully constructed arrangement. Eleanor Blackthorne watched their taillights disappear from her bedroom window, a satisfied smile playing at her lips. She'd lived long enough to recognize love when she saw it, even when the people experiencing it were too stubborn or frightened to acknowledge it themselves. Her grandson was going to be just fine. The call came at 3:17 a.m., jarring Celeste from restless sleep. Her mother's voice was weak, frightened, and barely coherent through the pain medication. "Celeste, honey, I'm back in the hospital. The pain got so bad and the doctors, they want to run more tests." Celeste was out of bed and pulling on clothes before her mother finished speaking. "I'm coming, Mama. I'll be on the next flight." "You don't have to." "I'm coming." She was stuffing things into a suitcase when Dorian appeared in her doorway, hair tousled from sleep, wearing nothing but pajama pants and a concerned expression. "What's wrong?" "My mother. She's in the hospital in New Orleans. I have to go." Her hands were shaking as she tried to fold a sweater. "I know we have that gallery opening tomorrow night and the investors' dinner next week, but—" "Celeste." His voice was gentle but firm. "Stop." She looked up to find him watching her with an expression she'd never seen before, not the controlled businessman or the practiced charmer, but someone genuinely worried about her. "I'll have the jet ready in an hour. We'll both go." "You don't understand. This could be days, maybe weeks. You have meetings, responsibilities. They can wait." He moved closer, carefully taking the sweater from her trembling hands and setting it aside. "My wife needs me. Everything else is secondary." The word wife, spoken with such quiet conviction, made her breath catch. For a moment, she forgot they were playing roles. "Dorian, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she didn't realize she'd shed. "We're in this together, remember?" 2 hours later, they were airborne in Dorian's private jet, Manhattan's lights fading below them. Celeste sat curled in one of the leather seats, staring out at the darkness while Dorian worked quietly on his laptop across from her. "Tell me about her," he said suddenly, closing the computer. "What?" "Your mother. What's she like?" Celeste smiled despite her worry. "She's extraordinary. She taught French literature at Tulane for 30 years. She can quote Baudelaire from memory and makes the most incredible beignets in all of New Orleans. She's stubborn and brilliant and has never met a stray cat she wouldn't feed." Her voice caught. "She's the strongest person I know, which makes seeing her like this so terrifying," Dorian finished quietly. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, then moved to the seat beside her. "When my parents died, I kept thinking that if I just worked hard enough, achieved enough, I could somehow make up for not being able to save them. It took me years to realize that some things are beyond our control. How old were you? 15. Old enough to think I should have been able to do something. Too young to understand that sometimes bad things just happen to good people. Celeste turned to study his profile in the dim cabin lighting. Is that why you work so much, to maintain control? Partly. He met her eyes. It's easier to focus on quarterly reports than deal with feelings. And lonelier. Much lonelier. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. They landed in New Orleans as the sun was rising, painting the sky in soft pastels. Dorian had arranged for a car to meet them, and as they drove through the French Quarter toward the hospital, Celeste felt the familiar ache of homesickness mixed with dread. She's going to ask questions, she warned as they walked through the hospital corridors. About you, about us, about everything. Let her. I want to meet the woman who raised someone like you. Margot Delacroix was awake when they entered her room, looking small and fragile against the white hospital bedding, but with eyes that were still sharp and alert. She was beautiful, Celeste realized, even sick, the kind of elegant bone structure that age couldn't diminish. Maman, Celeste said softly, rushing to her bedside. There's my girl. Margot's voice was weak but warm as she embraced her daughter. Then her gaze moved to Dorian, standing quietly near the door. And this must be the young man who's captured your heart. Celeste felt heat flood her cheeks. Maman, this is Dorian. Dorian, my mother Margot. Mrs. Delacroix. Dorian stepped forward, his usual confidence replaced by something almost shy. It's an honor to meet you. Sit down, both of you. I want to hear everything. Despite her obvious exhaustion, Margot's eyes sparkled with curiosity. Celeste has told me so little about you, Dorian. What do you do? I run a technology company, he said simply, taking the chair beside Celeste. But more importantly, I'm completely in love with your daughter. The sincerity in his voice made Celeste's heart skip. She watched her mother's face light up with the first genuine joy she'd seen there in months. How did you meet? She was working for my company as a translator, Dorian said, his hand finding Celeste's. She spilled coffee on a very important contract. I did not, Celeste protested, laughing despite everything. You absolutely did. Completely ruined 3 hours of work. His eyes were warm with affection. Best thing that ever happened to that contract. Margot watched this exchange with the knowing look of a mother who'd spent decades reading between the lines of her daughter's stories. And how long have you been married? 3 weeks, Celeste said quickly. 3 weeks, 4 days and 16 hours, Dorian corrected, checking his watch. But who's counting? The doctor's visit an hour later brought cautiously good news. The cancer hadn't spread, but Margot would need to stay for several more days of treatment. As they settled into the routine of hospital visits, something unexpected happened. Dorian fit. He charmed the nurses, brought Margot books of French poetry from the hospital gift shop, and somehow convinced the kitchen staff to let him make proper café au lait in their break room. He listened to Margot's stories about her students with genuine interest and asked thoughtful questions about French literature that surprised both women. He's nothing like I expected, Margot whispered to Celeste when Dorian stepped out to take a business call. What did you expect? Someone cold, ambitious, the kind of man who would marry my daughter for convenience rather than love. Margot's eyes were knowing. But he looks at you like you hung the moon, Cher. That evening, in their suite at the Hotel Monteleone, Celeste found Dorian on the balcony overlooking the French Quarter, a glass of wine in his hand and a thoughtful expression on his face. Penny for your thoughts? Your mother is remarkable, he said without turning around. I can see where you get your strength. Celeste joined him at the railing, accepting the wine glass he offered. She likes you. The feeling is mutual. He paused. This morning, when she was talking about teaching Proust to undergraduates, her whole face lit up. That's where you get that. The way you light up when you talk about something you love. Like what? Like that story about the family in Paris. Like when you're explaining why a particular translation captures not just words but meaning. He turned to look at her. Like when you smile at me and I forget for just a moment that this is supposed to be pretend. The words hung between them like a confession. Down on Royal Street, jazz music drifted up from one of the clubs, mixing with the warm night air and the scent of jasmine. Dorian, I know, he said quietly. I know this complicates everything. I know we have a contract, an arrangement, a plan. He set down his wine and turned to face her fully. But somewhere between playing house in my penthouse and watching you be brave in that hospital room, I forgot to keep my heart out of this equation. Celeste felt her pulse quicken. What are you saying? I'm saying that when your mother asked how long we'd been married, I wanted to say, not nearly long enough. I'm saying that when you looked terrified at 3 a.m., my first instinct wasn't to protect my business interests, it was to protect you. He stepped closer. I'm saying that this stopped being fake for me somewhere around the moment you signed that contract. This is dangerous territory, she whispered, echoing his words from weeks earlier. Absolutely. His hand came up to cup her cheek. But I've never been one to play it safe. When he kissed her, it was nothing like she'd imagined a first kiss with Dorian Blackthorne would be. It wasn't commanding or possessive or calculated. It was tender, questioning, hopeful, like a man asking permission to fall in love. When they broke apart, both breathing unsteadily, Celeste rested her forehead against his. What happens now? She whispered. I don't know, he admitted. But for the first time in my life, I'm looking forward to finding out. Below them, New Orleans pulsed with life and music, and the kind of magic that made impossible things seem inevitable. And somewhere in the warm Louisiana night, two people who had started as strangers began to realize they were becoming something neither of them had dared to hope for. 6 weeks later, Celeste stood in the marble bathroom of their Manhattan penthouse, staring at the divorce papers Dorian had left on the vanity that morning. Her mother had made a full recovery and was back home in New Orleans, stronger than ever. Eleanor had accepted their marriage completely, even going so far as to gift Celeste her grandmother's pearl necklace. The year-long charade could end tomorrow, if she wanted it to. So why did the sight of those papers make her feel like her world was crumbling? You found them. Dorian's voice came from the doorway, quiet and careful. She turned to find him leaning against the frame, still in his business suit from another late meeting, his tie loosened and his expression unreadable. Were you planning to discuss this with me or just leave legal documents lying around like grocery lists? I was trying to figure out how to bring it up. He stepped into the bathroom, his reflection joining hers in the mirror. We've been back from New Orleans for 6 weeks and we haven't talked about what happened there. About what it means. What do you think it means? I think it means we're both terrified. He moved. Closer, his hand settling on her shoulders. I think it means we've fallen in love with each other and neither of us knows what to do about it because it wasn't part of the plan. Celeste leaned back against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back. The contract is almost up. Which is why I had the papers drawn up. If you want out, you should be free to go. No strings, no complications. His voice was steady, but she could feel the tension in his body. $10 million, as promised. And if I don't want out? His hand stilled on her shoulders. Then we need to talk about rewriting our contract. She turned in his arms, studying his face. Over the past weeks, she'd learned to read the subtle changes in his expression, the way his jaw tightened when he was worried, how his eyes softened when he looked at her, the almost imperceptible relaxation in his shoulders when they were alone together. What kind of contract? The kind without an expiration date. His hands came up to frame her face. The kind that starts with love instead of convenience. The kind where we share the same bedroom because we want to, not because we're trying to fool anyone. That's a very different proposition than what we started with. Everything about this is different than what we started with. He smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd be standing here asking a woman to marry me for real, I'd have had them committed. And now? Now I can't imagine my life without you in it. His thumb traced her cheekbone. I love the way you argue with me about everything from coffee choices to corporate policy. I love that you make me laugh during board meetings with your text messages. I love that you've somehow made my grandmother like me more than she has in 20 years. Celeste felt tears threatening. Dorian, I love that you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love that you stayed up all night helping Marcus write his wedding vows, and that you remember the names of every security guard and barista in the building. His voice dropped to a whisper. I love that you saw something worth saving in me when I'd forgotten it existed. You want to know what I love about you? She said, her hand settling on his chest. I love that you pretend to be this cold, calculating businessman, but you've secretly arranged for every single mother in your company to have flexible working hours. I love that you installed a reading nook in the children's ward at the hospital, where my mother was treated and thought I wouldn't find out. His eyes widened slightly. How did you? The head nurse mentioned it. Apparently a mysterious donor wanted to make sure kids had somewhere comfortable to read while visiting sick parents. She smiled through her tears. I love that you remember how I take my coffee, and that you leave little notes in French on my pillow when you have to leave early for meetings. Your French is better than mine. I love that you're learning anyway. She reached up to straighten his tie. I love that you stayed with me every single night at the hospital, even though I never asked you to. I love that you held my mother's hand during the scary test results and made her laugh when she needed it most. Celeste. His voice was rough with emotion. I love that underneath all that armor is the sweetest man who brings his grandmother flowers and remembers everyone's birthday, and somehow made me fall completely, helplessly, impossibly in love with him. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and full of promise, while behind them the New York skyline sparkled in the evening light. So what do you say, Miss Delacroix? He murmured against her lips. Will you marry me? For real this time? I think, she said, smiling up at the man, who had become her whole world, we should renegotiate our terms. What did you have in mind? Well, I want full partnership in this relationship, equal say in all major decisions, unlimited access to the good coffee machine. Her eyes danced with mischief. And I want the jewelry clause removed from our contract. What jewelry clause? She held up her left hand, where the Art Deco engagement ring caught the light. This ring was never part of a business arrangement. This ring means you love me enough to spend forever figuring out how to make me happy. Done. He spun her around, both of them laughing. Anything else? Just one thing. She grew serious for a moment. I want to rewrite the confidentiality agreement too. How so? I want the right to tell everyone we meet that I'm married, to the most incredible man in the world, and that I'm so crazy about him that sometimes I can't believe this is my life. I think I can live with those terms. He set her down gently, his hands remaining at her waist. Should we make it official? What do you mean? I mean a real wedding, with your mother and Eleanor and everyone who matters to us. I want to marry you in front of God and everyone, with no contracts or clauses or expiration dates. His eyes were bright with love and laughter. I want to promise to love you for the rest of my life and mean every word. Dorian Blackthorne, she said, standing on her tiptoes to kiss him again. You have yourself a deal. 3 months later, they stood in the garden of the Blackthorne estate in the Hamptons, surrounded by white roses and the people they loved most. Eleanor cried happy tears while Margot beamed with pride. Marcus served as best man, while Celeste's childhood friend from New Orleans stood as maid of honor. Do you, Dorian Alexander Blackthorne, the minister asked, take Celeste Marie Delacroix to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live? I do, Dorian said, his voice strong and sure, his eyes never leaving Celeste's face. I absolutely do. And do you, Celeste Marie Delacroix, Take Dorian Alexander Blackthorne to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health for as long as you both shall live. I do, she whispered, her heart so full she thought it might burst with happiness. Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. And as Dorian swept her into his arms and kissed her under the summer sky, with their friends and family cheering around them, Celeste thought that sometimes the best contracts were the ones written not in legal language, but in the language of the heart. Later, as they danced to their first song as a real married couple, Dorian whispered in her ear, "Any regrets about our original arrangement?" "Just one," she said, smiling up at him. "What's that?" "I wish I'd spilled that drink on you sooner." He laughed, the sound rich and warm and full of the joy that had become their constant companion. "Here's to happy accidents, Mrs. Blackthorne." "Here's to love," she corrected, "in all its beautiful, unexpected forms." And somewhere in the evening air, as the stars began to twinkle over the Hamptons and the music played on, two hearts that had found each other through the most unlikely circumstances settled into the rhythm that would carry them through all the days to come. Their contract was complete. Their love story was just beginning. The end.